I work the graveyard shift at the Starlight Motel, a job that suits my particular solitary disposition. Out here, where the ambitions of civilization have long since given up and retreated, the highway is a long, dark ribbon of asphalt and winding through miles of godforsaken desert. The Starlight is a necessary pause for the exhausted or the lost, a small, humming island of artificial light in a vast, silent sea of darkness and rock. The air itself feels ancient. Most nights are predictable, governed by the rhythmic, labored groaning of the old ice machine. It seemed utterly ridiculous, the kind of inside joke meant to gently haze the new guy. The slow passage of the hours was a balm, a welcome monotony. Now, my nights are defined by a slow, creeping dread that began so subtly, so quietly, that I almost missed its arrival entirely. The desert air was still and surprisingly mild, a welcome break from the oppressive heat of the day. As I walked, I passed the door to room 22 and stepped into a pocket of air that was so unnaturally bitingly cold, it felt like I had walked through a shimmering invisible wall and into a commercial walk-in freezer. The cold was so absolute and intense, it stole the air from my lungs and made my teeth ache. I could see my own breath plume out in a thick white cloud in front of my face. It was a perfect, contained column of impossible, icy air. I took a single, startled step back, and the normal warmth of the mild night returned instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. I cautiously reached my hand forward, and it was like plunging my entire arm into a bucket of ice water. A deep, primal part of my brain, the part that our ancient ancestors listened to for survival, knew this was not normal. This was not a draft. This was a presence. That was the night I started keeping the office door locked at all times. It started with a feeling I'm sure everyone knows, a distinct, unnerving sensation of being watched. I'd be in the small, steamy laundry room, the rhythmic sloshing of the washers, my only company folding stiff, sun-bleached towels, and the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up so sharply, it felt like a physical, icy touch. I would whip around, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs, fully expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim hall light. But there was never anyone there. Just the empty, silent hallway and the low hum of the dryers. I'd laugh it off, my own laughter sounding hollow and strange in the enclosed space. I blamed the intense isolation, the gallons of cheap, bitter coffee I consumed, the disorienting, surreal effect of the late hours. The mind plays tricks on you in the deep of the night. That's what I told myself, over and over again. It became my personal mantra, a fragile shield against the encroaching, possessive darkness of the motel. Now, I understand completely. Stan wasn't being dramatic. It wasn't the sharp, demanding rap of a living guest needing a new key or more towels. This was different. It was a soft, almost hesitant asterisk tap, tap, tap asterisk that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It would echo down the concrete walkways, but it also felt like it was right behind me. On the other side of the office wall itself, a gentle but insistent request. It always happened around 2 a.m., the true dead of night, the point where the world seems to hold its breath. The first few times, I would jump up from my stool, my adrenaline spiking, and check the bank of security monitors. The grainy, black and white feeds would show nothing but the empty, silent walkways, distorted by the faint, ghostly glow of the distant parking lot lights. Just shifting shadows and profound silence. It was a sound without a source, an effect without a cause. And that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. He was trying to warn me in the only way he knew how, using simple, inadequate words for something that was profoundly complex and impossible to describe. He was a man drowning in strangeness, and he'd forgotten how to speak the language of the normal world. The door to room 24 doesn't just stick. It holds. It just doesn't want you to open it. and the constant electric flicker of the neon vacancy sign, a beacon of buzzing pink and green against the infinite black. I chose this job for the solitude, for the deep, profound quiet that settles over the world after 2 a.m. The feeling of being the only conscious soul for 100 miles in any direction is a strange and powerful comfort to me. I don't just like the quiet, I crave it like a drug. But I've been here long enough to learn that the quiet is a lie. It's a carefully constructed facade, a thin curtain pulled over something much, much older and far less peaceful. He was thin to the point of being skeletal, with a gaunt, hollowed-out face and eyes that looked like they had seen far too many sunrises from the wrong side of the window. On my first day, he didn't waste time showing me how to handle the meager inventory or operate the clunky, ancient computer system. His training consisted of a single cryptic session that lasted less than 5 minutes. He leaned far over the worn Formica counter, his face uncomfortably close to mine, his breath a sour mix of stale coffee and cheaper cigarettes. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, like dry leaves skittering across pavement in a cold wind. The nights here, they have a personality, he rasped, his eyes never quite meeting mine, instead darting to the dark corners of the office. You just do your job. Clock in, clock out. Don't go looking for trouble. Don't ask questions you don't really want the answers to. And never, ever, for any reason, go into room 24 after midnight. The door sticks. He offered a strange, joyless laugh then, a dry, hacking sound that shook his entire thin frame. And if you hear someone asking for a towel for room 12, it's a prank. Just ignore it. Then, without another word, he picked up his worn coat, the fabric thin and shiny at the elbows, and left, walking out into the blinding daylight without a single look back. I've come to the unsettling realization that not all of our guests are checking in with a driver's license and a valid credit card. Some of them have been here for a very, very long time, their accounts long since settled in ways I don't want to contemplate. And I've come to understand why this particular job has a turnover rate that would make a fast food franchise blush. Most people who take this key don't to last more than a month before they flee into the reassuring daylight, often leaving the office door unlocked behind them in their haste. The previous night manager was a ghost of a man named Stan. At the time, I dismissed his words as the bizarre, melodramatic ramblings of a burnt-out employee on his last day. A sticking door? A prank call about towels? My first few weeks were defined by their comfortable, boring sameness. Then came the knocking. The cold spots were much harder to rationalize away. One night, I was doing my rounds on the second-floor balcony. The sounds got worse, more specific, and harder to ignore. I started hearing faint, disembodied whispers, like a muffled, sorrowful conversation happening just on the other side of a wall. Then, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound started on the other end. Scry-ape, scry-ape. It was a dry, deliberate sound, exactly like fingernails being dragged slowly and purposefully across wood. And underneath it, I could hear another sound, something thin and far away, like a small child crying inconsolably. A sound of pure, hopeless grief. I could never make out the words. They were always just beyond the edge of hearing, but the tone was always drenched in a deep, inconsolable sadness. I grabbed the master key and marched out of the office, my footsteps echoing loudly, ready for a confrontation. But as I rounded the corner and approached the room, the window was dark and empty. I stood there for a long moment, listening intently. Nothing but the hum of the highway. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and shone my heavy flashlight inside. The day shift manager, Carol, a stern, no-nonsense woman who seemed like she had seen it all twice, went to check on him. We had to use the emergency override key to get in. The room was pristine, untouched. The bed hadn't been slept in. The towels were clean and folded. It was as if no one had ever been there. the caller ID showed all zeros again. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. This was different. The lights on the outdoor walkway began to flicker violently, erratically, almost in time with my frantic, panicked heartbeat. As I passed the humming ice machine, it suddenly fell silent. The storm and the strange events had just been the overture. The real performance was just beginning. Around 4 the egg, the doors on the first floor walkway began to swing open. First room 10, then 11, then 12. One by one, slowly and deliberately. On their own, they swung wide with a synchronized groan of rusty hinges, revealing the dark, empty, gaping rooms within, like mouths in a silent scream. I frantically switched the monitor to the second floor. The same thing was happening up there. Room 20, 21, 22. In that sudden, dead silence, I heard a new sound coming from inside it. On the second floor monitor, a figure emerged from the deep darkness at the far end of the hall. The figure reached the end of the walkway, near the top of the stairs. It stood perfectly still for a long, terrible moment. And then it turned its featureless, empty head and looked directly at the security camera. It looked directly at me. It was a tall, slender shape of pure black, a moving silhouette that was somehow darker than the shadows it had emerged from. It didn't walk. It glided, moving with an unnatural, liquid smoothness that my brain couldn't properly process. It drifted silently down the walkway, pausing for a moment in front of each open door, as if it were a landlord inspecting its vacant, waiting properties. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like someone was weakly but persistently banging on the metal walls from within. This wasn't a sad sigh or a mysterious knock. This was a direct, malevolent threat. This was hatred. "What do you want?" I whispered into the receiver. The door was ajar. It was hanging open about a foot. I knew, with absolute, bone-deep certainty, that I had locked it. Protocol said I had to check the room. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get back to the locked office and hide. But some foolish, professional part of me pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, and the intense, suffocating cold inside stole the air from my lungs and burned my skin. My flashlight beam cut through the oppressive dark and landed on a completely impossible, insane sight. All the furniture, the heavy bed with its solid mattress, the solid wood desk, the bulky armchair, had been piled in the very center of the room, stacked precariously on top of each other like a child's building blocks, a grotesque totem reaching almost to the ceiling. I slowly backed out, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I pulled the door shut, heard the lock click into place, and this time I ran. Except for one impossible detail. On the nightstand, next to the lamp, sat a single old-fashioned brass key. Then a voice came through. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the foam and into the bones of my skull. A sound less like a voice and more like grinding stones. It spoke only a single, horribly distorted word. "Get ... out." It was ornate and heavy, with intricate scrollwork, and it wasn't one of ours. We checked the security footage together. It clearly showed the man entering the room. We watched the entire recording for the rest of the night. It never showed him leaving. He went in, and he never came out. She came back a few minutes later, her usually stern, weathered face pale and tight. A sad ghost here. A weird sound there. I was wrong. I learned that the hard way on a rainy Thursday in October. It wasn't just a few isolated, lingering spirits. The entire building was alive. The motel itself was the entity. And on that night, it was starting to wake up. "The room's empty," she said, her voice unusually quiet. But the deadbolt was thrown from the inside. The room was completely, spotlessly empty. It was untouched, exactly as I had cleaned and prepared it myself earlier that day. The bed was made with military precision, The cheap, generic art was straight on the wall. I went back to the office, a cold, heavy feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. I replayed the security footage. There it was, clear as day. Around 1:30 a.m., the television in the guest lobby, which was never, ever on, flicked on by itself. It wasn't tuned to a channel, just blasting a wall of white noise static at full, deafening volume. I fumbled for the remote, my hands shaking, but it wouldn't work. I tried the power button on the TV itself, pressing it again and again, but nothing happened. I had to yank the plug from the wall just to make it stop. The sudden, immense silence that rushed back in was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. A few minutes later, as I was trying to calm my shot nerves by making coffee, the glass pot on the machine suddenly cracked with a loud, sharp pop and shattered, sending scalding hot coffee and shards of glass exploding all over the counter and floor. At 3:13 a.m., a dark shape appears in the window. It stands there, perfectly still, for almost 2 full minutes before it simply fades away. It doesn't walk away from the window. It doesn't move at all. It just dissolves into the nothingness of the darkened room. Sometimes I'd hear a woman sighing, a soft, melancholy sound that would drift through the locked office door. I spent the daylight hours digging through boxes of old, forgotten records in the back office, a dusty, musty room filled with the motel's forgotten history. I found water-stained guest ledgers and stacks of brittle, yellowed newspaper clippings. There were so many stories, so many tragedies tied to this one lonely place. Accidents on the desolate highway, a salesman who suffered a fatal heart attack in room 18, and a mysterious disappearance in the 1970s, young woman whose car had broken down nearby. She was last seen walking towards the comforting lights of the motel and was never heard from again. Her name was Eleanor Vance. The article included a blurry, overexposed black and white photograph. She was wearing a dark dress with a high collar, just like the silhouette in the window of room 14. The sound of the distant crying faded into nothing. There was a single sharp click as the line went dead. He was solid. He was real. He arrived late, around 1 a.m., gliding his old, dark car into the lot with the headlights off, its engine making almost no sound, as if it were coasting on silence. He was tall and unnervingly thin, wearing a dated but well-kept suit that looked oddly out of place in the modern world. He didn't say a single word. He just stood on the other side of the safety glass, his face obscured by the deep shadow of his hat, and slid a small pile of crumpled, old-looking cash across the counter. The bills were soft, almost like fabric, and they smelled of dust and lavender. He had no luggage. I gave him the key for room 12 and watched on the monitor as he walked down the walkway. His steps were completely, unnaturally silent. He didn't make a sound on the concrete. He unlocked the door and went inside. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I shakily checked the motel's digital phone system. According to the log, no incoming calls had been received in the last hour. The phone had never rung at all. That was the first time I felt real, undiluted, tangible fear. It wasn't just my over-caffeinated imagination playing tricks. Something was happening here, and I was completely, utterly alone with it, and make the hair on my arms stand up on end. One night, the front desk phone rang, its shrill, piercing cry cutting through the thick silence like a blade. I glanced at the caller ID. It was just a string of zeros. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver, a sense of deep foreboding washing over me. Finally, my curiosity won out. I picked it up. Starlight Motel. At first, there was only the hiss of dead air, thick and heavy. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice coming out much shakier and thinner than I wanted. The scratching stopped instantly. As the weeks bled into one another like watercolor on wet paper, I started to understand. The motel wasn't just making noise. It was trying to communicate, to interact with me in the only ways it knew how. The first time I saw one of them with my own eyes was on a security monitor. A woman was standing at the window of room 14, just peering out into the empty, moonlit parking lot. She was just a dark, indistinct silhouette against the unlit room, but I could make out the unmistakable shape of an old-fashioned dress, something with a high, frilly collar. My first thought was a squatter. My fear was immediately replaced by a hot surge of anger. After that, I couldn't stop myself. I became obsessed. Then there was the man who checked into room 12. He wasn't a phantom on a camera or a whisper in the hall. The next day, the 11 a.m. time came and went. That's impossible. We both went back to the room together. She was right. The deadbolt was slid firmly into place. I used to think of the motel's phenomena as separate, isolated incidents. The night began with a cold, relentless downpour that hammered against the roof and windows like angry fists. That's when the phone rang. First, there was only static, louder this time, angrier. I threw the phone down as if it were red hot. My nightly rounds were a complete nightmare. When I got to the second floor, my flashlight beam landed on the door to room 22, the room with the permanent, unnatural cold spot. Back in the relative safety of the office, I slammed the deadbolt and watched the monitors, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. But then I saw him. I was paralyzed, frozen in my chair, my eyes glued to the screen, unable to look away from the horror unfolding. A wave of pure, undiluted, chemical terror washed over me, a feeling of being seen and known and despised by something ancient and deeply malevolent. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. The camera feed instantly dissolved into a blizzard of roiling static. When the image returned a few seconds later, the hallway was empty, but I knew it wasn't over. The air in the office grew heavy and cold, thick with the cloying, sickly sweet scent of decay and damp earth. Then the knocking started. Not the soft, hesitant taps from before. This was a hard, violent, explosive banging on the thick glass door of the office. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded like someone was trying to break the glass with a sledgehammer, the entire frame of the office shaking with each impact. I scrambled backwards, away from the door, my chair tipping over, and I hit the wall of room keys. They rattled and chimed, a ridiculous, cheerful sound in the middle of the chaos. The banging stopped instantly, and in the suffocating, ringing silence that followed, I heard a whisper. It wasn't on a phone or out in the hall. It was right here, in the office with me. It came from the darkest corner of the room, behind the filing cabinet. "You don't belong here," it hissed, a voice that sounded like the rustle of dead, dry leaves, like the crumbling of ancient paper. My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall to the floor, unable to even scream. The shadows in the corner seemed to move, to writhe, to congeal, taking on a shape that was tall and thin and fundamentally wrong, a shape made of impossible angles. And then, headlights. Two bright, beautiful beams swept across the office, flooding the room with brilliant, mundane, wonderful light. A semi-truck was pulling into the parking lot. In the sudden, shocking brightness, the shadow in the corner recoiled, dissipating like a puff of smoke. The heavy cold lessened, and I could breathe again. The spell was broken. A tired-looking driver got out, stretched, and walked over. He just needed to use the restroom. He had no idea that he had just saved my life. I still had an hour left in my shift. It was the longest, most terrifying hour of my entire life. When Carol arrived at 6 on me, she took one look at my pale, sweat-drenched face and knew. I didn't even have to say anything. I told her everything that had happened, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic, incoherent rush. I expected her to tell me I was exhausted, that I was crazy. Instead, she just listened patiently, her expression grim and knowing. When I was finally done, she poured me a cup of fresh, hot coffee from her personal thermos. This place, It gets hungry sometimes, she said, her voice low and serious. It tests new people. It feeds on fear, on panic. You gave it a feast tonight. You can't let it know you're afraid. That's the most important rule. You can't feed it. How can I not be afraid? I croaked, my voice raw and broken. Carol, it was in the office with me. It spoke to me. I know, she said, nodding slowly. The tall man, he's spoken to me too. And to stand before you, and to the manager before him. He's the landlord, so to speak. You have two choices. You can walk out that door right now and never come back. No one would blame you. Or you can stay. You can learn the rules. You can learn to coexist. Any sane person would have walked. They would have gotten in their car and driven away until the Starlight Motel was just a bad memory in the rearview mirror. But leaving felt like running away from a fundamental part of myself now. It felt like letting it win. I had looked into the motel's abyss, and it had looked right back into me. We were connected now, whether I liked it or not. I still worked the graveyard shift. The nights are quieter now, most of the time. It's as if the motel expended all of its energy in that one terrifying, theatrical outburst and has settled back into a slumber. The whispers and the cold spots and the phantom phone calls remain. They're just part of the building's character now, like the peeling paint or the humming ice machine. Sometimes I see Eleanor's silhouette in the window of room 14, and I just give a little nod, letting her know I see her. The aggressive, angry presence has retreated. It's dormant, waiting. I've learned to acknowledge them all, to speak out loud into the empty air and tell them I'm just here to do my job, to keep the place tidy. Just passing through. I'll say as I walk past room 22, we have reached a sort of tense, fragile truce. I still don't know what the Starlight Motel really is. A gateway to somewhere else? A prison for spirits who can't or won't move on? Or just a lonely, forgotten place on the highway where the veil between worlds is worn thin and frayed over the long, lonely years? The question that haunts me now isn't whether the ghosts are real. I know they are. The question that keeps me awake long after my shift ends, as the sun rises, is whether I'll one day become one of them, another permanent resident of the Starlight, checking in for the final time and never, ever leaving.